Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, a show that likes to stretch out the telescope across Canada, around the world, never losing touch with what's going on right here on beautiful Vancouver Island. I'm Robin Adair, and I think our biggest story at the moment is the return of the prodigal son, John Jurisic, known to many as the Croatian sensation, who was just in Croatia. And Johnny, I'm sure your arms must be sore from all that flying, but also from all the waving to the throngs of Croatians lining the street, the high fives, the celebration, the sensation back in the mothership.
Well, they certainly love the Victoria Rumble Roomich. And of course, I just absorbed all the adulation and certainly had a few more drinks than I should have had, a few more cevapcici than I should have had. However, it was great. I'm so glad to be back breathing Canadian air. And so many things have actually happened while I was gone.
It's surprising how that happens, Johnny.
Surprising, eh? As though somehow I had anything to do with it. Nonetheless, one of the more compelling stories is one dealing with travel, that being these BC ferry sailings. I'm simply startled how this is not working. Continually, years after years. On July 1st weekend, huge numbers of people were either delayed or completely stranded at BC terminals. Even walk-ons, Robin, were stopped because the ships can only take a certain amount of passengers. It's been a terrible mess, and it's still continuing year after year after year, summer after summer. I'm startled.
Well, I'm startled, but in some ways, maybe this is a bit of government interference or government overreach over the last 6 years. The NDP government has certainly taken a lot more ownership of the day-by-day operation of BC Ferries than had been previously the case. You may recall the BC Liberals a long time ago decided to recreate ferries as an arm's length virtual crown or crown agency of government. It was going to be run like a business, and some would argue it ran much better in that model. But over the last couple of years, of course, we had the COVID pandemic. There were layoffs. A lot fewer ferries were running. A lot of people left to go on to other jobs, and the CEO was let go. A lot of confusion at BC Ferries, and we're seeing this now where we're having major repair work done to major ferries in the middle of the summer months, in the middle of tourism season. And at the same time, we've got this major BC strike that's blocking our ports. It's costing billions of dollars, and the federal government has to get its act together there to clean that up. So I've got to clean all of this stuff up, John. It's a black eye for the province and a black eye for tourism.
Without a doubt, one of the major industries in the province, especially Lower Vancouver Island. I couldn't agree more with you. We just had Astrid Chang in the VRR studio a couple of weeks ago talking about tourism's big comeback on the South Island. This isn't the time to drop the ball. All of that being said, the province has recently made a positive announcement regarding the Belleville Street Terminal. Minister Rob Fleming announced BC will contribute $41 million to a project budgeted for about $300 million. It will start servicing international arrivals of the Coho and Clipper starting in 2028. While construction is underway, the terminal operation will be shifted to the steamship building. Positive news down the road, little chunk of good news. We still need more.
Yeah, I think it's good news, John. And you have to admit, on this type of project, the NDP really comes to play, especially on Vancouver Island. You think back in the 1990s, it was the NDP government at the time under Harcourt and Glenn Clark, Mo Sahota at the reins as the minister at that time. Remember Mo Sahota?
Oh, yeah.
And they really pushed through on the Island Highway. So many improvements on the Island Highway, and it expanded it all the way to Port Hardy. It was really something where you have a lot of MLAs that are NDP MLAs on the island, and the NDP knows you've got to look after those constituencies if you want to stay in power. And so they come forward now with this project. And the funny thing is, I sat on a committee where it was being debated whether it was a good idea to build a Belleville Street terminal. And the recommendation out of that committee at the time, this was under Gordon Campbell's watch, was that we should move the terminal out where the cruise ships are. And that didn't go over very well. And now, finally, full circle, the NDP is saying yes to the terminal. They've got to get other players on side to get all the financing together. But I think the Liberals, for their part, kind of dropped the ball on this.
I recall fondly as well, Robin, the lobbying we did within the chamber boards and under the chamber banner. All of it, none of it worked until now. So we can, I think, with some confidence say 20 years of work has finally succeeded. Fantastic. Now, sticking with politics, special congratulations to Ravi Parmar of the NDP for his victory in the Langford-Juan de Fuca by-election. Can't say it's a big surprise to see John Horgan's seat stay in EP. Nonetheless, it was a surprise, at least for me, to see Kevin Falcon's BC United group finish fourth. Fourth, Robin. They certainly have a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. And, people ask me, what do you think, Robin? What do you think the next election? Do you think there's any chance that, Kevin Falcon could win that thing? And I say that, well, there's always a chance. But until a government really stumbles and makes some big mistakes, until you hear rumblings that governments are indeed in trouble, that the public's starting to take a hard second look, usually the party in power is going to stay in power. And so far, I haven't seen a big stumble from David Eby. There was that earlier stumble about the Royal BC Museum, but they backtracked on that. Now the minister that brought that in is gone. So is the CEO at the museum. So I think the NDP is fairly safe for now. And, for Ravi Parmar, he's already showing some real acumen in the job. I see he was out at an all-weather field and commending Stu Young, the former mayor, for all the good work in getting that field built. And so I think that's pretty smart politics. And just before we leave this, I want to give a thumbs up to Camille Curry, who battled long and hard in Langford-Juan de Fuca on behalf of the Green Party, gave it her all. And, I was sorry to see her fall short, but we're glad that BC Healthcare Matters will continue under Camille's leadership as the BC doctor's story and the terrible shortage across the province remains.
Yeah, you bet, Robin. We'll certainly be focusing on the healthcare sector again in the Rumble Room. But before we close the by-election story, interesting as well was the strength of the BC Conservative Party. I take it they finished ahead of Falcon's BC United. I'm sure we'll talk about this in more depth another day. But is the right divided? Who knows? Nonetheless, now let's swing over to a very important municipal, personal, day-to-day problem, that being policing and victims services. Lots of tragedy on the streets of our municipalities, and more victim service calls in BC that involve assault, bodily harm, and that puts tremendous pressure on our first responders. Let's learn more about this issue, and we've invited and have Ian Batey as the representing the Executive Director of Police Victim Services in BC. Why don't we zoom him in, Robin? Boom, boom, boom.
Now joining us in the Rumble Room for the first time is Ian Batey, the Executive Director of the Police Victim Services of BC, and welcome to the Rumble Room.
Very appreciative. Happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you here. And we go back a bit, Ian. I think I first met you through the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. You used to be on their board. John and I ourselves have been very heavily involved with the Chamber in the past. So you also were very involved in the Coalition to End Homelessness. You were a co-chair of that and very busy in the business world, also very busy in outreach to people that are in need. So tell me, getting back to homelessness, if homelessness was really being dealt with in the way it should be, would your police victim services group be as busy as they are? if we had these people all actually in a residence, would things be safer? Or is it really even beyond this in terms of another step that's required in terms of more facilities, more things for people with drug addictions, more facilities for people with mental health issues? I mean, is this stuff that you're working with or at least recommending to different levels of government from the work that the police are doing on the front line?
Right. So I'm going to kind of wear two hats with this response, and I just want to make sure I'm really clear with that. I think the analysis, Robin, that you provided, or the environmental scan, I think is completely and totally accurate. Things are not good. Issues regarding safer communities and everything that contributes to that are. I'm not going to. I will use the term, if they're not bottomed out, they're certainly at a pretty significant low ebb. People are individuals. They have different types of foibles, addictions, characteristics, whatever they may be, leading to homelessness, principally through three issues: addictions, mental health, and also what I would call economic suffering. The COVID, I think, has produced a situation of many people that would never have thought that they would have been homeless, but as a result of losing their job or whatever, just the money's not there to be able to survive. So with that in place, I think what we all know is that the main characteristics of the fix, for lack of a better term, is access to appropriate, affordable housing. Okay. Another piece of that, though, that is very central to for individuals who are homeless because of addictions, mental health issues, is that there must be a significant element of supportive services that goes with that model.
First of all, wonderful to have you in the Rumble Room. Love the background. Appreciate that. And you and I have crossed paths in so many ways over the last 10 years.
That is true.
But maybe let's dig a little bit deeper into this victim piece that you had just began to describe.
Yep.
Of course, when most of us hear victim, we think violent crime and domestic violence. That's
True.
mostly what we think. Fascinating that you would explain it differently. That in fact, victim covers, the way that I've just described it, covers only about a third of the cases your organization deals with.
Right.
And you were just sort of reviewing that. Could you just sort of retract a tad and just once again tell us what are the other 2/3 of the victims
right. Yeah.
that are being looked after by your group?
Right. So, John, I think a perspective to think about is a victim or a person who's considered to be a victim can absolutely be the person that has been immediately impacted by the event. So, for example, in Greater Victoria, a recent and very tragic situation was the bank robbery, and I'll just use the term shootout, that happened at the Bank of Montreal on Shelburne Avenue about 8 or 9 months ago. Right? Very clearly, the people that were trapped in the bank while that incident was happening, I think everybody can say, well, boy, like that's definitely a person who's a victim, right? But interestingly, out of that particular incident, there are approximately 40 to 45 actual individual victim files that have come about. And many of them are people that were, across the road or witnessed it or, provided some kind of assistance. Or I remember specifically the reference to the gentleman that owns the laundry, if I remember correctly, across the way, who had a couple of bullet holes in his storefront window. So there's no specific criteria or limiters in regards to who a victim is. So our world definitely has a significant element of what I would call criminality. So whether it's intimate partner issues, whether it's murders, assaults, motor vehicle accidents, like all of those things that could ultimately end up in the criminal justice system for settlement. However, there's a big component of the work that we do that has, frankly, no connection at all to the criminal justice system. One of the focuses of one of our very small offices in McBride, so McBride is in what's called the Robson Valley at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, is dealing with snowmobile accidents, dealing with skiing accidents, and all of those kinds of things. I know of a circumstance up in McBride where the RCMP attended a situation where snowmobilers who unfortunately were killed as a result of an avalanche or whatever it was, and victim services in that particular situation played a very, very significant role, both on the day of the event by actually going to the scene where the helicopter was coming down out of the mountains, and we're working with I think in this particular case, at least a dozen family members whose, son or daughter or parent or whatever were injured or affected by the slide. And I know this may sound a little bit pragmatic, but like their role was to deal with, manage, comfort, and provide support to the victims' families, literally when that helicopter landed from being up in the mountains. Yeah.
Your people would be the first responders in a sense.
Yes. In a much bigger situation, floods in Chilliwack, let's use that as an example, right? The police-based victim services component of that was frankly quite small in relationship to, flood emergency, fire departments, and all of those types of things. But I think another example that is that I would share with you and your viewers is about last summer, if my timing is correct, in Kelowna. There was a very significant downtown accident that happened when the construction crane collapsed. The police were called, and about half of downtown Kelowna was cordoned off. Right, there was unfortunately, some people literally sitting in their offices that lost their life as the crane crashed through the ceiling or whatever. But the point that I would just make is that even though there's no criminality associated with that's a very good example of a public disaster where police are engaged and are very actively involved, where police victim services in Kelowna ended up and probably are still working with family members.
So, the thing is, it's interesting to think about the scope of what you do.
Mhm.
And I said first responder. In some ways, it's analogous to what you're talking about. To an ambulance shows up at a terrible accident, the ambulance people do immediate medical treatment, but they're not
Yes.
they're not the end of the treatment. They're the beginning. They help get the person to the hospital. The doctors
Correct.
take over. Is that
Right.
basically your victim services guys? They try to help on the front line, get people into the broader help that they need. They kind of do almost
Mhm.
an assessment and then move them to the people they need to see, whether it's counselors, whether it's people to help with housing,
Mhm.
other groups that stand by. Do you coordinate all that?
Yeah, I think that's a very accurate statement. So I'll just add to it a little bit. So sometimes the response by police victim services is literally at the scene of the issue. Um, Another really, really good example of that is that police victim services, along with police constable or official from any particular location, would be involved in notification of next of kin, for example, and other forms of sudden death. I mean, certainly some of those are criminal, no doubt about it. But individuals, for example, that potentially and unfortunately take their own lives or die unexpectedly. The growth of sudden death in the province, and all those activities are considered to be sudden death, is another area that is growing quite significantly. So in a situation like that, and I can talk about Greater Victoria Police Victim Services, which is actually the service provider where the three of us live, um, they have a very poignant interactive video regarding a story of a woman whose husband passed away very, very suddenly. and talks and reflects on the referral service and the immediate support service.
I'm going to turn the tables on all of us here. My final question is actually about the police themselves.
Okay.
I think that it's an understatement to now characterize the job as very stressful these days, enforcing not only the law and protecting the public, but in constant interaction with the very unfortunate members of our society who really struggle to cope with life. When police are involved in victim services, I suspect it, gives everyone a real lift from their end. Helps with morale. It helps with dealing with the. But in fact, who helps them? Do you guys help them? I mean, that must be tough, dealing with the very strenuous circumstances on the streets these days.
So I'm going to answer that question this way. Police-based victim services as an organization, one of our key roles is to ensure that the mental, physical health of our members that are embedded inside police departments and forces, as I've indicated, are absolutely the best that they can possibly be, from a mental health perspective, from a physical perspective, but also very importantly, from a professional development and training perspective, to make sure that they are completely and totally up to date on the law, the authority, the services, and have the ability to do those things and provide local flexibility. So although we don't specifically have them as a client, if I could put it that way, because of the nature of the close interaction between uniformed and sworn police officers and our people, there is a huge connectivity around the industry's mental health and wellness. So that's kind of the formal part. But because of the nature of the professional relationship between all these organizations, and I've seen this myself in many of the locations that I've had the good fortune of touring around the province, there's a level of camaraderie or professional bond, for lack of a better term, and it would be quite normal for a police officer to walk down the hall, knock on the police victim services door, and say, "Ooh, had a rough one last night," or whenever, just like to have a chat or whatever. And sometimes it's not like a formal part, but I think it's reflective of the connectivity that actually happens.
I have tremendous respect for our first responders, including the medical teams, social workers, and obviously police. So interesting to hear from Ian Batey. But as we get ready to wrap things up after my mega trip to Europe, I understand Saanich hasn't gone to the dogs.
In a sense, that is true, John. And, we've been covering that story for a few weeks. This was, of course, the big debate about dog leashes, and there was a big drive to do something about making sure that people could still take their dogs to Saanich area parks like Mount Doug Park and take the dogs off leash and have a wonderful time. But there was a report out that was carefully studied that suggested that they limit that dramatically. Council in Saanich has now voted unanimously to follow the recommendations of the People, Pets, and Parks study, and that's going to require people to keep their dogs on leash in 84% of the area of Saanich parks. And mayor and council have admitted that the vast majority of correspondents and speakers were actually against these restrictions. Thousands of people put their names in a petition. Several councillors said this is one of the hardest votes they've ever made. And why did this all happen? Well, for one thing, the local First Nations Council sent a note saying they wanted dog leash on parks in Saanich. And for a council determined for reconciliation, and they want to make it tangible, I mean, they were not going to vote against that call by First Nations. So is this the right decision? Will people really accept this? Will they take a hard second look? I guess time will tell. And speaking of time, John, it's now time to wrap another Rumble Room.
Well, I can't believe it, Robin. It's sort of great to get back into the saddle Another Power Pack show, even in the middle of the summer. We're having endless amount of news stories to talk about. And interestingly enough, people keep watching our show. We're up around 1.25 million impressions. And that, of course, is the most influential kind of viewership. So congratulations, Robin. Thank you to our viewers. Thanks to everyone who follows our show. Clearly, they are interested in what we have to say about stuff. And for those who haven't, the 2 or 3 that are left in the region, let's see if I can remember. We do have a Facebook page, we have a Twitter page, and obviously a YouTube page where all of our stuff and interviews live. We are also involved with Facebook news groups. We're also involved in Instagram, as we are on TikTok. So please consider following us. Please consider viewing our rants, our comments, and our opinions. And for now, after really pleasantly plugging back into my Croatian roots and taking in all of the adulation from the Victoria Rumble Rumich, I come back renewed and strong as your Croatian sensation. I am Johnny Boris Ladislav Juricic.
I'm merely Robin Adair. But you know, at least that was in a crossword puzzle on the weekend. What's the famous old ballad from England that involves a robin? And it was Robin Adair, so I made the crossword puzzle. I'm Robin Adair indeed, and rumble on.